And we're back. What should we be discussing?
Okay, this is one I hate to say because I'm stupid. Okay, so it's about the essence of God, okay. And I want to invite Todd, and I want to invite you, and I want to invite Daniel. And so it's about a conversation I was having with Daniel earlier, and then I expressed an opinion, and he said, well, I don't think we want to say anything that's, what's the word, sacrilegious. Wait a minute. I says, so it gets back into that thing about, well, shouldn't we be able to talk this out and learn? And maybe I don't understand all the stuff. And so when you talk about, what's the word for, God is all one essence versus more than one essence? Maybe you're not familiar with that term. I called it Homoiousian, and Dan thought it was hilarious. Homoousian.
Now, is it Homoousios or Homoiousios?
There's two of them.
What's the difference?
Well, that's the difference.
The word homoousios means same substance, whereas the word homoiousios means similar substance.
Correct.
The council affirmed the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are of homoousios, same substance. Church fathers have already decided it's homoousios, not homoiousios.
So can we even record this to distribute our stupidity in this conversation?
I'm mispronouncing all of this, man.
Okay, so here's the deal. Are they of one substance or are they similar substance? And then here's the question I had. Okay? When Jesus went to the cross, so now we're in a Christian realm of Trinitarianism, and if you're not a Trinitarian, you don't even want to listen to us unless you're just curious.
No, don't say that.
No, well, maybe you're just curious to listen to some guys who are confused about what it means. Okay, now, here's the thing. We're going to talk about it and get really confused, and then we're going to bring in a couple of guys who really know what they're talking about and see if they can straighten us out. See, that's my idea here, okay? Okay, so I think we can include the whole talk about how we wandered around here a little bit. Anyway, is that fair enough?
That's fair enough. And it goes all the way back to the Nicene Creed, man. So this
it does. Yes, it does.
Ancient church history. We're talking a long time.
Yes. And the thing is that when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he asked if there's any way for this to be taken from me, this cup, let it be taken from me. And we understand that he had a choice. He could have chosen not to go to the cross. Do we believe that?
Yes.
Okay. Now,
but it's not. Yeah.
Now, in order for him to have been tempted by Satan in the desert, even well before that, he was tempted in 3 different ways. Would not, for him to truly be tempted, it would have been possible for him to choose wrongly. Otherwise, it's not really temptation, is it? Which is what one of the guys I knew from another sect that we don't consider to be Christian, because they're not Trinitarians. He said this thing where God's talking to himself, and as far as he was concerned, that was just all nonsense. How is God going to decide against God? See, so
maybe even the same thing with God and Abraham. Like, it doesn't even have to be God and God. It's like, yeah, Abraham's not changing God's mind about any of this stuff.
Right. Well, yeah, or can he? And so,
but I'm of the opinion that this is.
Well, or that thing with Moses, where Moses said, where God says, "Stand aside, I'm going to wipe them out," and then Moses says, "No, don't do it. It's a bad idea." And then God says, "Okay." So
But God could have been faithful to his promises, even doing those things that Abraham and Moses talked God out of.
But more profoundly, if Jesus had decided wrongly, and this is where, when I had a conversation, it was kind of like, well, is it Jesus the man or Jesus the God? And my attitude is, I don't think you can
separate the two.
I don't think so. I don't think if Jesus, whoever he was, decided to make bread and eat it in the desert, and thereby, I believe, sinning, if he had given into that temptation, I think all of him would have sinned. I don't think it would have been this thing where he'd have split his divinity and his
body and his divinity.
So then you would have had the unified Trinity in opposition to itself, right?
Well, and we have some. Now it's not quite the same, but Lucifer, let's say the spiritual beings, schisming off is sort of a
how does that happen kind of a question, right? It's sort of like, well, that's a schism that doesn't make any sense to a lot of people.
And that actually raises a question then for me, how much of a risk was this for God to put a part of himself, let's say, of the Trinity, into human form to risk...
And whether even if you agree with whatever the Nicene Creed form of Homoiousian is,
yeah.
Right now, here's where I said to my friend, I said, well, I think God could have made the same choice. The Father now. In other words, and he says, no. He said, no, he's set, because I was talking about how I'm opposed to all of these theologians who use Euclidean logic and ancient Greek thinking in order to determine who God is. In other words, God has to be this way because logic says so. But now you're talking about this thing where we were talking before, where in another talk, about two sides and they don't understand each other. There's obviously things that God knows that we don't know, and so he's coming in from another dimension and understanding that makes us our knowledge and understanding pales, and so our logic is flawed in that. And then we come out and say, well, no, God has to be this way because logic says he has to. And it's sort of like, oh yeah, but God says that
you don't have all the puzzle pieces, so it doesn't matter how well put together your logic is.
Right. But God also says, your wisdom is foolishness and all that kind of stuff. But here's the problem. We also believe as evangelicals, Trinitarian evangelicals, that if you don't have a basis in fact, which we base on the Bible, which we consider to be concrete and literal, and therefore,
except where it's not. Even as evangelicals, there are parts of Scripture that we do not take literally. We take.
Despite that, the philosophy though is we're not making it up as we go.
No,
that there's a foundation to it, and there is a culture around interpreting it, so that there's a right way and a wrong way to see these things. And that as a result, our God, the verse that comes to mind, I don't know the reference, our God is not a God of confusion, but rather of order, right? So we know that we should be able to figure out some things. We should be able to trust what we know, but at the same time, we're idiots. And so you come along, and I said, so why wouldn't God be able to say, oh, well, if Jesus is going to go that way, now God has the same dilemma Jesus did. God the Father would have the same, and God the Spirit. They would have the same dilemma that Jesus did. Sort of like, oh, he left. Okay, well, we can leave him go, which would cause schism in the universe. I don't even understand what would happen, what that means. And even though, and then, you know, this is where I'm told, you know, well, wait a minute.
And maybe that was Lucifer's ploy in all this, because if he could tempt Jesus, he would have won God over to his way of viewing things.
Yeah, maybe God would have said, "Oh well, I guess I'm in too because I'm not willing to lose Jesus." And so then my friend said, "No,
like
no,
what
no,
happened
no,
with
no.
Adam?
God's unchangeable. You wouldn't have that happen." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. Why would you deny God the Father the same freedom of will that Jesus?"
No, that's it's even worse than that, because if God is of the same essence and Jesus makes a choice, God and the Spirit, it's not even a question of moral dilemma. Haven't they then already, because they're one, like
they'd be all in?
I mean, wasn't that the risk in sending, and this is an interesting question, you know, so we think about the, you know, God's reaction with the death of Jesus's physical body on the cross, right?
Yeah.
But how much of and I don't know about experience of emotions and all of that with God, but what's the, you know, the nervousness, the risk of sending a part of yourself, however you want to conceptualize that, to this? It's like, this is the plan, and I believe there was a plan from the beginning that this
that's
this is how it's going to work out. But you send a part of yourself knowing that there will be this temptation where there's a real risk of, I don't know, a universe-ending calamity, and you decide to risk not only, like in our concept, your son, but you basically risk everything.
Well, see, and then, you know, it even gets into some of the quantum mechanics stuff, you know, where, you know, you got all of these possibilities, and then when you actually see something, all the possibilities collapse into reality. And though right now, I hesitate to hang too much on that hook, because right now they're starting to wonder whether even that works. So anyway, isn't it kind of funny?
Quantum is really weird, where computers can win a sick number of, like, coin toss games, like stuff that really should be like random, and quantum computers can beat you at a sick rate, man.
Right,
and the only reason,
not just that, but there's some funky quantum things going on right now with experiments and stuff where they're showing some really weird stuff, and I don't understand that either. But anyway, I mean, one wonders whether some of that quantumish nature of reality is actually at the God level, where there's decisions and will actually are more real than the desk here in front of me.
And the other thing that we talked about, I think sort of cements that, because when you actually write something down, when you actually set yourself to something, your will to something,
mm-hmm.
and you actually set yourself to it,
yeah,
it almost doesn't matter what it is.
It's almost like a prophecy.
You work towards enacting that in the world, and you can do that in positive ways and very destructive ways.
Right, and there's a lot to the fact that if you work towards a goal, you're more likely to succeed than you are to fail. And it's almost like you know, wisdom and truth and knowledge are almost like in a quantum probabilistic kind of a thing, where it's kind of like, well, 9 times out of 10 it's true. And it's kind of like, well, wait a minute, what about the other 1 out of 10? It's either true all the time or it's not. And, you know, that's where people used to say, well, God only knows. because there's this other dimension, and it could be that when you see it from God's perspective, truth is truth and it all works, and it's only our limited understanding. But then you get into that whole understanding that like in the Renaissance and in the Enlightenment, men who said, we should be able to figure this out, and then science just exploded, theology just exploded. And I think there's a lot of traction in pursuing truth. And if we can't find truth and we can't know truth because of the quantum nature of the world or whatever, or this thing where I talked about different perspectives, then what's the point? It doesn't matter. And I don't believe that. So I believe that there is a truth and that God is solid, even if, and this is where I was trying to say to my friend, where he says, well, if you're saying God had the ability to choose that, that's a terrible thing. And that's,
isn't it a more terrible thing if God didn't have a choice? Because doesn't that mean
God's just mechanical? But see, when I said, well, then if he had the choice, he said, well, that's heresy. And in fact, it was along the lines of, not only should you be burned at a stake, it's so heretical, you should also agree to say, by the way, I'm going to light the match for my own stake. So in other words, it's so bad. It's so, back to the Nicene Creed and the fathers and what's the nature of God and what do we believe, and how Trinitarians have zeroed in and circled on this is the way it is, and that whole Homoiousian is what I called it, and I'm going to call it that again. Which one of those is real? I'm going to go with, I believe in the Nicene Creed. I think that's a solid document, and goes way back. And I think our discussion of this shouldn't mean that simply talking about it makes us a heretic, but we should be careful to say, well, we're trying to find the truth. And what it might be is for us to actually understand, believe, and internalize the truth means we need to struggle with it the same way the church fathers did 2,000 years ago.
Well, that goes back to Jacob. I mean, the people of Israel, the naming of Jacob, of Israel, and that is basically the people who wrestle with God.
Right.
I mean,
right.
That's the essence of our faith, is wrestling with these truths.
That's what Israel means, right? He who wrestles with God. Yeah. So I started this conversation. We're going to cut it off right there. It's an interesting conversation. We recommend nobody becomes a heretic over it, whatever that means. And we're going to see if we can get some other smarter people in here to really confuse us. All right, I'm going to end this.